I don't think there's any piece of art that I've loved longer or more fully than Batman the Animated Series. I genuinely can't remember a time in my life before the show. It's always been there. As a kid, I loved the excitement and colorful characters. As a teenager, I loved the darker tone and the show's interest in examining those characters. And as an adult, I can marvel at how it isn't just nostalgia. The storytelling really is consistently excellent, while also being wrapped in a warm glow of nostalgia. I've seen every episode multiple times across a variety of formats, and my affection for the series has never faded. At the same time though, I suspect my latest rewatch will be the last time I go through the series from beginning to end for a while, and there's no better way to mark the occasion than a ranking video. And I don't mean just listing the top 10 or top 20 best episodes. I'm talking a complete ranking of all 100 plus episodes from worst to best. I can't do it any other way. For one, I'm not convinced that even a top 30 could encompass every great episode of the series, as it really is that good. But I also want to talk about the bad. Don't get me wrong, Batman the Animated Series is my favorite show of all time, and likely always will be, but I'm the first to admit there's some duds sprinkled throughout its run. The nature of episodic television means quality is gonna vary, and while Batman does largely lean towards the good to great end of the spectrum, no one bats 1,000. Not even Batman.
They don't call you Batman for nothing.
Some admin before we get started. This list includes the 85 episodes from the original series run from 1992 to 1995, and the 24 episodes of the New Batman Adventures from 1997 to 1999. There is an argument to be made that these are technically different shows, especially given the change in visual style, but I'm opting to rank both together. The New Adventures was a direct continuation of the original series, made largely by the same crew, and is included in home video releases as a part of Batman the Animated Series. It counts. I won't be ranking the movies, however, as it doesn't seem fair to pit feature films against 22-minute episodes. For Cliff Notes though, Mask of the Phantasm is fantastic and one of my favorite Batman stories ever told. Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero is also great, and a wonderful finale to the classic animation style. Mystery of the Batwoman came so long after the series had ended that it feels a bit pointless, especially considering how slight the story is, but it's still fun. That Batman and Harley Quinn movie from a few years ago is not part of this universe. The film's co-writer described it as its own thing, despite the animation style and the return of Kevin Conroy and Lauren Lester as Batman and Nightwing. Final note, while I am technically ranking 109 episodes, the handful of two-parters are counted as one, bringing the total number of episodes ranked to 102. And with all that established, let's get started. "102, Love is a Crock." I thought it might be difficult to name a worst episode, but it was actually dead easy. Love is a Crock is awful. For one, it's from the revamp era, so the character designs are a dramatic downgrade, and you better get used to that complaint now, because it's gonna come up a lot. Killer Croc and Baby Doll have also been recast, and neither is as good as the original actor. Croc in particular sounds a lot blander now.
You know, there's something the brains back at the joint didn't think about.
Too bad we didn't meet sooner, babe. They're sending me up the river tomorrow night.
Even with the old cast and old style, though, this episode would still suck. Outside of the inherent odd couple energy, there is nothing to Croc and Baby Doll as a pairing. The only thing they have in common is that they're both physically abnormal, but so are a lot of Batman's villains. Why not pair Baby Doll up with Clayface? At least they're both actors. We are told Croc and Baby Doll make a formidable crime duo, but the one robbery we see is horribly botched, and the villains only barely escape. The bigger issue, though, is the utter character assassination of Baby Doll. Half the time, the writers treat her as a literal child, rather than a diseased adult whose baby persona is a calculated performance, and her motivations are similarly dumbed down, yearning for Croc's affections for no discernible reason. Baby Doll was once a tragic figure, desperate to recreate her glory years and hold on to a sense of normalcy, now reduced to a jealous girlfriend who decides to blow up the city because her crush doesn't like her. Ugh. 101. Critters. The best Batman villains are the ones who reflect some aspect of the Dark Knight's own psychology. An evil farmer who makes monster versions of farm animals does not make the cut. Bruce Timm has reportedly described Critters as essentially an episode of the Adam West Batman show played straight, but that's not a particularly admirable goal. Being a comedy is precisely what makes the 60s Batman show good. Remove the humor and you're just left with a dopey plot, which doesn't even stand up under scrutiny. Farmer Brown turns to crime when his mutated sheep go on a rampage and brings financial ruin. But he also apparently had enough capital to engineer a new slate of giant farm animals, so he must have had some cash lying around. And frankly, I don't think the episode uses its premise enough. Why, in the episode about monster farm animals, does Batman spend so much time fighting giant bugs? Number 100, Cat Scratch Fever. Unlike the last two episodes, Cat Scratch Fever has a perfectly serviceable premise. Catwoman gets poisoned by Roland Daggett, who plans to unleash a plague on Gotham City. That should make for a decent episode, but the execution is woefully beneath series standards. The opening courtroom scene is especially awful, with a wildly over-the-top performance from the actor playing the judge, and sloppy animation that taken together play as farcical. But the whole episode looks stiff and awkward. It doesn't help that Daggett's goons have the same energy as the Wet Bandits, and aren't the least bit credible as threats. Number 99, Lockup. Arkham Asylum security guard Lyle Bolton is fired for the violent cruelty he inflicts on inmates and turns to vigilantism against the institutional embodiments that he feels allow crime to foster. A paranoid, tough-on-crime right-winger should make a perfect foil for Batman, but Lockup fails to live up to that promise. For one, the character design is whack, a collection of disparate Action Man elements filtered through Rob Liefeld-inspired sensibilities. I'm half convinced the character is meant as a parody of the broad-shouldered, edgy anti-heroes so prevalent in 90s comics, but that idea doesn't really land either. The episode can't decide if Bolton's violence at Arkham should be funny or scary, and in splitting the difference, fails to provide any perspective. The title card is also probably the worst of the series. It's just text haphazardly slapped over a semi-relevant still image. What is this, an Eyebrow cinema thumbnail? Number 98, Moon of the Wolf. I'm not mad that Batman fights a werewolf. What bothers me is that Batman spends half the episode thinking it's a guy in a werewolf mask.
Just tangled with a mugger in a werewolf mask.
My brother in Christ, you literally fought a 7-foot-tall Catman in the last episode. What is wrong with you? Also, that rad electric guitar riff is cosmically lame. Number 97, Terror in the Sky. I swear I don't hate creature features, and there's some real good ones coming up, but this follow-up to On Leather Wings ain't it. It's basically the same episode as On Leather Wings, just with a lot less atmosphere, a lot less intrigue, and a less visually menacing Man-Bat. There is at least a twist towards the end, but it's both entirely predictable and not fully supported by the episode. Number 96, The Cape and Cowl Conspiracy. Credit where it's due, the big third act twist here is a genuine surprise. But also because it's kind of nonsensical. Spoilers ahead if you care, but the premise here is that Baron Josek hires Deathtrap master Wormwood to acquire Batman's cape and cowl. Wormwood doesn't understand why the Baron would want them, so the Baron agrees to tell Wormwood if Wormwood tells the Baron where he had hidden stolen bearer bonds. But at the end, it turns out that Batman was posing as the Baron all along, and he was just looking for the bonds. But what if Wormwood didn't care about why the Baron wanted Batman's cape and cowl? How would Batman barter for the information then? Why would Batman concoct a scenario that might jeopardize his secret identity? Why not ask for Batman's utility belt or something? Wormwood also plays like a low-rent Riddler, without any of the personality. There's also this weird bit where Wormwood escapes from Batman, and Batman just sort of growls as the scene ends. It's very bizarre. Number 95, Torch Song. This episode introduces Firefly and firmly plants him as a C-list villain at best. Here, he's a pyro expert who works for his pop diva girlfriend before she dumps his ass and he seeks vengeance. That's a fine enough premise, but Firefly is taken out almost incidentally by the end, which makes him difficult to take seriously. That alone wouldn't be enough to label Torch Song bad, but what really stands out is the shocking lack of empathy for his victim. Pop diva Cassidy is portrayed as this callous floozy who invited Firefly's violence through her flirtations and teasing. That misogynistic streak sinks an already mediocre episode to the lower end of this list. Number 94, Cold Comfort. I like the idea of a villain destroying things purely because it will hurt someone for whom that thing is important. I just hate it for Mr. Freeze. This is a character Batman the Animated Series completely reinvented, transforming a stock bad guy with a freezing gimmick into a figure of tragedy and pathos. Heart of Ice is probably the most famous episode of the show, but follow-ups Deep Freeze and the direct-to-video movie Sub-Zero further expanded and developed Freeze as a character, only for Cold Comfort to yank him back to a stock villain. Now Freeze is a bad guy who just wants to hurt people because he's hurt too, and who by the end is enacting a doomsday plot against Gotham City. It's not a betrayal to the same extent Love as a Croc was for Baby Doll, but it does rob Mr. Freeze of so much of what makes him special. Also, Freeze's goons being these sexy ladies wearing parkas with no pants is deeply embarrassing. Maybe that's the real reason Nora left him. There's at least this fun bit where Bruce chastises Tim Drake for his poor performance on a civics test, and Tim throws back that the concept of Batman stands against the fundamentals of the justice system in the first place.
You don't exactly follow the rules of due process.
How did you do on your math test?
That's cute. Number 93, I've Got Batman in My Basement. This episode is often cited as one of, if not the worst episodes of the series, and yeah, an episode about precocious little kids who nurse Batman back to health and help save the day is deeply lame and the antithesis of the maturity that helped make Batman the Animated Series so special. But this episode is also the first to introduce the Penguin, and I love him. I love his design, I love his theme music, I love Paul Williams' performance. The character deserved better than being introduced like this, but his presence is still enough to make this the best of the bad episodes. For indeed, it's time to move on to number 92, The Terrible Trio. I personally quite like the concept of these three rich trust fund babies who turn to petty crime because they're looking for a good thrill, and that sense of a more deeply rooted darkness and narcissism in Warren is well conveyed. Where the episode struggles is turning these boobs into a convincing threat for Batman, especially since he's backed up by Robin for half the episode. There's also a dialogue scene between Bruce and Warren where the two shoot skeet, and I really hate that. Bruce's aversion to guns is a pivotal character detail that's thrown away here for no real reason. If you needed an asshole rich guy hobby for these guys to do while talking, golf was right there. Number 91, Bane. Bane starts out pretty strong, laying out the eponymous villain's origin story effectively and building to the showdown between he and Batman. But then Bane gets jobbed out so definitively in the finale that the character is rendered a joke.
Is this the best you can throw at me, Rupert?
There's also this subplot throughout where Rupert Thorne's henchwoman Candace is romancing Bane, and the two are plotting to overthrow Thorne, which, is fine. Except Batman exposes her scheme to Thorne at the end.
Candace?
It's played off like a wacky sitcom bit, but Thorne's a mobster. He's definitely going to kill Candace for this. And yeah, this is her last appearance in the show. Nice going, Bruce. Number 90, Beware the Creeper. TV newsman Jack Ryder is exposed to a mix of Joker's laughing gas and the chemicals that created the Joker, transforming him into a superpowered maniac called the Creeper, who goes nuts on Gotham City while lusting for Harley Quinn. As a kid, I thought this episode was hilarious. As an adult, man, is the Creeper annoying. This kind of hyper-caffeinated comedy only really works when the writing is as witty as the energy is manic. Without that, the character is just loud. That said, there are a couple of bits here that work. I like when Batman asks who the Creeper is, and he responds,
They call me Yellow-Skinned Wacky Man.
But I prefer the Creeper.
That's a decent joke. I also like when the Creeper is going nuts in a department store to the horror of everyone, except the store employee, who's completely unfazed. You gotta figure these sorts of megalomaniacal freaks are a common sight in Gotham. Number 89, Prophecy of Doom. This is another episode that frequently pops up in worst lists, and it's not hard to see why. The plot involves a fraudulent psychic conning rich people of their fortune in a mixture of televangelist sermons and cult leader wisdom. Batman investigates, as does Bruce Wayne. It's a pretty low-stakes affair, but the episode also leans into that, playing up Nostromos as more of a buffoon than a genuine villain. The writing isn't really funny enough to function fully as a comedy, but there is some amusement to be found here if watched in the right spirit. Number 88, Holiday Nights. For reasons I do not understand, the new Batman adventures began with a Christmas anthology episode. On its own terms, this episode is pretty mid. There is some fun to be had across the three segments, but outside of the Harley and Ivy short and the brief coda with Gordon on New Year's Eve, they're basically just a series of decent-ish action scenes, without much of a story. The comic this episode is based on also includes a really great Mr. Freeze short, but its plot contradicts the events of Sub-Zero, so it had to be cut. That's a problem, as it's clearly the most substantial segment, and without it, Holiday Nights is severely lacking. The bigger problem, though, is that the episode is a terrible choice for establishing the new style of the show. We aren't able to ease into the new animation style, and we haven't even been introduced to this Robin yet, but here he is, working with Batman like it's old hat. Clayface also shows up, which is odd given a later episode will position his return as a big dramatic twist. His segment is also the worst example of a story that is functionally just an action scene. On the plus side, Bullock gets some highlights undercover as a mall Santa. I really like that within the space of 3 minutes, he shows kindness to one kid whose father is in prison and threatens another.
You're not the real Santa Claus.
Sure I am. Want to see my gun? Ow!
So, Holiday Nights is not without merit, but it's a baffling way to begin the revamp era. Especially since the episode first aired in September. A Christmas episode. How does that happen? Number 87, The Underdwellers. I enjoy me a secret sewer layer, and The Underdwellers does gain a lot from having a pretty good one. Atmosphere in general is high, and the music is also really good. Unfortunately, original villain the Sewer King is more irritating than threatening, and he's also entirely one-dimensional. Worse still is the episode's B-plot, where one of the children the Sewer King uses is rescued by Batman and gets into some hijinks at Wayne Manor with Alfred. Especially eye-rolling is a scene where the kid picks up a rifle, and Batman gives a little speech about how children shouldn't use guns. It feels like I'm being preached to rather than watching a cartoon. And you might respond, but Batman is anti-gun. Great point. Why does he keep a collection of firearms then? Number 86. The Strange Secret of Bruce Wayne. On paper, this episode sounds awesome. You've got the introduction of Hugo Strange, who discovers Batman's secret identity, and that information luring out the Joker, Two-Face, and the Penguin into the chaos. Batman not only has to thwart 3 of his most dangerous enemies, but also find a way to protect his secret. Unfortunately, Strange is portrayed as more of a buffoon than any kind of criminal mastermind. Rather than using any kind of deductive skills to learn Batman's secret identity, Strange just hooks Bruce up to a mind-reading machine which shows images of Bruce's childhood tragedy and the dark night he became to combat them. That imagery is also pretty subpar just on its own terms. This series has many a great example of dreams and visions which allude to the death of the Waynes and the origins of Batman, and this just doesn't come close. Also, the solution to Batman's exposed identity is a complete cheat. No spoilers, but woof. There is, however, fun to be had in watching the three big supervillains interact with each other.
Get out of my face, clown!
Which one?
Number 85, Sins of the Father. The origin of Tim Drake as the series' second Robin. This episode tells its story pretty well, establishing Tim's backstory, personality, and finding a reasonably effective way for him to join the team within 22 minutes. But there's a lot here that just kind of annoys me. I'll fully admit that I'm biased against a child-aged Robin. Not Robin himself, I like Robin, but Batman taking a 10-year-old crime fighting with him is a much harder sell, and Tim Drake is no Dick Grayson. That's a pet peeve though. My bigger issue is how the episode uses the imagery of the preserved Robin suit as this haunting symbol. This originally comes from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, and its weight came specifically because it was Jason Todd's suit, and Todd had died in battle. In that context, the image is quite powerful, a tribute to an ally, and a haunting reminder of Batman's failure. But in this episode, it's just a suit. And you could argue that we don't know until the end of the episode that Dick Grayson is still alive, and Alfred refers to him in the past tense, so it does carry a similar power, except that's not Dick Grayson's old suit. That's the new Robin suit that Tim dons for the climax and wears throughout the series. If the suit was just a background detail, I wouldn't care, but the episode places tremendous emphasis on this image, and it is not earned. On the plus side, Two-Face is one of the least butchered redesigned villains of the revamp, although he's also so close to his old design that it just reiterates how unnecessary the shift was in the first place. Number 84, Fear of Victory. This is another episode that tells its story reasonably well, but just kind of annoys me specifically. Scarecrow's design is an improvement from his initial appearance, and the fact that Robin is struggling from the effects of the fear gas adds a nice wrinkle to the story. But the plot is about Scarecrow using his toxin to fix and bet on sports games. And that just seems beneath a Batman supervillain. I'm not saying every story needs to involve a plot to blow up Gotham City. I like a smaller scale story. But something about this specifically feels unbecoming for a villain of Scarecrow's caliber. Number 83, Animal Act. Much as I loathe the new character designs, the revamp era's problems are more than just aesthetic. One especially pervasive issue is how the explosion of sidekicks makes for overstuffed episodes, and Animal Act is a key example. A robbery is conducted by one of the animals from the circus Dick Grayson performed in as a child, so Dick investigates as both himself and as Nightwing. There's a lot of potential here for a character study, which refers back to Dick's origins and looks forward to the man he has become. But the execution is hampered by so many characters pulling focus. Instead of committing to an episode built around Batman and Nightwing's strained relationship, or how Nightwing relates to this new Robin, the episode does a little bit of both, but really does neither. There is still some fun in seeing Dick Grayson look back on his history, though, and I like how the episode uses its surprise villain. Number 82, The Worrymen. No episode more fully embodies mid than this one. The Worrymen doesn't do anything egregiously wrong, and tells its story reasonably well. It's just not especially exciting. Bruce Wayne's rich BFF Veronica Vreeland returns from a trip in Central America with these miniature dolls she was gifted by a shaman. The shaman explained that if you sleep with them under your pillow, they'll take away all your worries, hence the name. What they actually do, however, is brainwash these rich bozos, including Bruce, into giving away vast amounts of their fortune. Turns out this is all a scheme from the Mad Hatter. That's a pretty decent use of Hatter's power set, and I do appreciate the satire of rich dummies easily duped by the veil of mysticism, but the episode never really rises above just being okay. For a show like Batman, my standards are a little higher. Number 81, Old Wounds. I used to love this episode. The flashback explaining how Batman and Robin fell out and set Dick Grayson on the path to becoming Nightwing. Oh, the angst. Oh, the drama. Watched as an adult, though, man did they fumble this story. Though the episode teases ideological differences to account for their fallout, the crux of Robin's anger is that Batman never told him Batgirl was Dick's girlfriend Barbara Gordon. The drama is predicated on an external rather than the personalities and values of the characters, and it's especially frustrating given Dick's transition from Robin to Nightwing should be a coming-of-age story of how Dick Grayson becomes a man. The episode even makes a point to underline this with Dick's college graduation and his ambitions to live on his own means rather than Bruce's dollar. But that's all hindered by Robin throwing a tantrum over not knowing his girlfriend is also a superhero. Rather than growth, this shows a lapse of maturity. Thankfully, Bruce Timm would never hinder a character-driven story of conflicting ideology by placing undue emphasis on Barbara Gordon's interpersonal drama ever again. What saves the episode is the Joker's guest spot. He's basically just filler so the heroes have someone to fight in between the emotional drama, but he's got some fun bits. Number 80, The Lion and the Unicorn. Red Claw is among the lamest original villains created for this show, and I'm frankly stunned the writers brought her back for a second appearance. But the foggy British setting does add a lot of unique atmosphere, and the action is pretty good, including Batman shooting down a nuclear missile before it destroys London. It's also fun to get some hints at Alfred's pre-Wayne Manor years. Number 79, Mean Seasons. What I like most about Mean Seasons is how creatively it adapts the villain Calendar Man for television. His Silver Age persona is probably too goofy, and his 90s serial killer incarnation is probably too dark. So instead, the writers took the essential component of a criminal who bases their crimes on holidays and combined it with some influence from D-list Batman villain Mannequin to create a new character. And so, we have Calendar Girl, a former model taking revenge on the industry cronies who wronged her. That's a solid spin on the calendar gimmick, and the holidays are also well woven into how Calendar Girl fights. The episode's commentary on the evils of the modeling industry feel a bit stock, but they're still laid out well. The only thing I wish is that the episode cut back a bit on action to focus more on the character drama. The ending is great in concept, but the full weight of the tragedy doesn't quite land. I think because we don't spend enough time with Calendar Girl as a person. Then again, Batman does fight an animatronic T-Rex, so maybe all that action was necessary. Number 78, Chemistry. Bruce Wayne gets married to some new lady named Susan? It's probably not a shock if I say something fishy is going on, and I'll leave a spoiler warning now if you haven't seen the episode. Turns out, Susan isn't human. She's a plant lady grown by Poison Ivy, one of dozens whose mission is to marry Gotham's wealthiest industrialists, then inherit their fortunes when Ivy kills the 1%ers at sea. The premise is a bit similar to the Worry Men, but Chemistry gets the edge, due to being more twisted and speaking more to character. The reason these plant people are so effective at marrying all these rich folk is a combination of Ivy's attraction pheromones, and by performing exactly the partner their target wants. For Bruce, that means a wife who won't object to him running off suddenly without explanation, utterly trusting, and without asking too much from him. It's not the most in-depth exploration of Batman's psychology, but it's something, and it's also as good as the new adventures get. Another side effect of the revamp era's explosion of sidekicks is Batman is really just another part of the ensemble, technically still the main character, but much more passive than he used to be. Its rare episodes in this era really delve into his personality, and while this exception is certainly not perfect, it's still welcome. Number 77, Paging the Crime Doctor. Paging the Crime Doctor starts out pretty familiar, with Batman chasing down Rupert Thorne's goons, but takes a turn when we're introduced to Thorne's brother Matthew, a doctor who had his medical license revoked due to involvement with Thorne's crimes, and now practices medicine illicitly, mostly to aid his brother's operations. It's an interesting way to flesh out Rupert Thorne, and the dynamic is interesting. Matthew also went to medical school with Bruce's father, which leads to a touching little moment at the end, where Bruce is able to help Matthew get his license back, and all he wants in return is to hear a little bit about his parents. Number 76, It's Never Too Late. I didn't plan to have small-scale stories about mob bosses and their brothers back-to-back, but sometimes that's how the cookie crumbles. This one's about Arnold Stromwell, an aging gangster reflecting on his life and legacy amidst a gang war with Thorne, his missing son, and the urging of family and also Batman that Stormwell give up crime. At its core, this is a pretty powerful story about regret and redemption, and I've always appreciated the show's willingness to tell less superpowered and less spectacular stories. That being said, this one does get a little preachy. Between Stromwell's brother being a priest and his ex-wife berating him for selling the very drugs his son is now addicted to, it's hard to ignore the nagging feeling that you're watching a PSA. The episode ultimately comes down on the right side of respectable, and there's still entertainment to be found here, but it could stand to tone down its moralizing a little bit. Number 75, Vendetta. This is the first appearance of one Killer Croc, a villain who was a pretty consistent part of Batman the Animated Series, despite rarely being the main focus. In this regard, Vendetta makes her a fitting introduction, as it isn't really Croc's story, but Harvey Bullock's, the detective framed by Croc and suspected of kidnapping and taking bribes from Rupert Thorne, with even Batman suspecting Bullock guilty for most of the episode. The mystery is not totally fleshed out or especially memorable in the long run, but it's nice to see an episode that focuses on Bullock a bit, especially given his contentious relationship with Batman. The rainy atmosphere also helps a ton in providing a classic crime story vibe, and it's fun to soak that in. Number 74, Joker's Millions. The Joker inherits $250 million and uses it to buy his freedom, giving up on crime to instead just enjoy being rich. There's a lot about this episode I love. The premise is fun, and there's tons of great gags which come from Joker flaunting his wealth, including and especially choosing to hire a new Harley Quinn rather than pay to get the real one out of Arkham. Everything about this subplot rules.
Anything you say, Mr. G.
The fact that Joker's freedom drives Batman crazy is also great. Hell, even before the Joker inherits his money, this episode is hilarious.
Hey, where's mine?
Sorry, kiddo! I could only afford one!
This should be a great episode. So why isn't it? Quite simply, I hate the Joker's redesign. In a series full of visual downgrades, none were as harsh and as hideous. I cannot overstate how much of a proper country we used to be. Number 73, Be a Clown. Back to when Joker looked awesome. Purely looking at the scripts, Be a Clown is a lot less interesting than Joker's Millions. For all the conflict between Batman and the Joker, the real heart of the story is the mayor patching things up with his son. It's pretty lame. Thankfully, the set pieces here are really sweet, climaxing in an awesome battle on a roller coaster. That's some pure comic book silliness, and I love it. Oh, the mayor and his son reunited, isn't that sweet? Yeah, whatever, let's rewind back to the roller coaster part. Number 72, Girls' Night Out. One sign that Batman the Animated Series was running out of gas towards the end is the prevalence of gimmick episodes, be they high concepts or crossovers. This is the first of such to appear on my list, and while arguably an omen of a great series in decline, I do like the individual episodes. The story here is that Superman villain Livewire shows up in Gotham and finds fast friends in Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn. Batman and Superman are out of town, so it's up to Batgirl and Supergirl to stop the trio of villains. Barbara and Kara are a fun pairing, and I like that subsequent references in Superman the Animated Series and Justice League Unlimited confirm the two stay friends. The villains steal the show though, especially Harley, who has to try much harder than her superpowered peers to just barely keep up. The action scenes also do a good job blending the different character abilities and telling a story rather than just being a series of gags. Hits all the necessary beats of a solid crossover. Number 71, What is Reality? Of the three Riddler-centric episodes, this one is definitely my least favorite, possibly because it focuses on a virtual reality battle between Batman and Riddler rather than on puzzles and intellectual twists. On the other hand, you do get to see the series get its Matrix on, with Batman donning a headset to enter a virtual reality which grants him fantastical superpowers in a world with its own set of rules. The nature of the high concept allows for set pieces the show could never do otherwise, and you can feel the writers and animators enjoying that freedom. Credit too for making the high-tech of virtual reality work within the show's retro aesthetic. Number 70, Blind as a Bat. The Penguin steals an advanced military helicopter to wreak havoc on Gotham City. Seems standard stuff, but the catch is Bruce Wayne was there at the robbery, and an explosion has left him temporarily blinded. If he keeps his eyes bandaged and away from light, his sight will recover. But it's hard to take time off when the Penguin is unleashing terror in the sky. So Batman gets himself a fancy helmet that allows for limited vision, provided he has a power source. The selling point for the episode is watching Batman fight from underneath. It's probably not a spoiler to say Batman eventually has his power source severed and has to fight Penguin completely blind. And the episode stacks further obstacles like the aforementioned helicopter or the fact that the final set piece takes place in a steel mill. It's a simple story, but it's told effectively. Plus the headset Batman uses to see gives him red eyes, which look awesome in his cowl. Number 69, See No Evil. I'm just now realizing that this is 2 episodes in a row which involve Batman unable to see the bad guy. Funny that. This one's about a little girl and her imaginary friend. That's nice. Except the imaginary friend is actually her criminal father who recently stole an invisibility suit and is using it to violate his ex-wife's wishes and see his daughter in secret, posing as an invisible being named Mojo while planning to take her away. That's less nice. Though not a full-on horror story, the episode does create a chilling atmosphere from the jump, and a thick air of tension lingers throughout. There's also fun to be had with the invisibility powers, and the way Batman tries to circumvent them. Though if anything hurts the episode, it's that, even invisible, I do not buy this guy as any sort of physical threat to Batman. Then again, the payoff when Batman finally has the villain beaten is pretty sweet.
No!
Peekaboo.
Also, kudos to the actress who plays the little girl. I'm not sure who she is, but she does a holy shit! Number 68, Time Out of Joint. Here's another fun fact. This episode contains a passing reference to the villain from See No Evil. Neat. Anyway, one of the things I like about the 2 Clock King episodes is how they lean into humor without being full-blown comedies. In this case, we have a technology of immense power, a device which allows the user to freeze time and walk through the space freely, essentially rendering them a god. And that power finds itself wielded by C-list villain the Clock King, as part of his quest for revenge on the mayor for silly reasons we'll get to when we cover his origin story. That mismatch of power amuses me, and the episode emphasizes it further when the villain is nearly thwarted by things like tripping over an old lady. But as I said, this isn't a comedy episode. The visual manipulation of time is creative and tense in its own right, and like what is reality, allows for set pieces we couldn't get otherwise. Number 67, The Demon Within. Another crossover episode from near the end of the series, though this time not with another show, but a character from DC Comics lore, Etrigan the Demon. I don't know the first thing about Etrigan, but this dive into the occult is a fun deviation from the norm. What stands out more than the magical powers on display, however, is just how vulnerable Batman is against the supernatural. Rarely do we see the Dark Knight fighting on the back foot, and it gives the spectacle a real sense of weight. Number 66, Cult of the Cat. Catwoman finds herself hunted by a cult of thieves who worship cats, and is forced to turn to Batman for help. There's lots of fun to be had here, from the cult itself and their shifting feelings towards Catwoman, to the running bit about all cats loving Selina and its amazing payoff, but the highlight is most certainly the dynamic between Batman and Catwoman. This episode comes late in the pair's relationship. It's the last episode to focus on it, in fact, and sees a lot of the early romance between them a distant memory. Batman is tired of giving Selina the benefit of the doubt, and Selina is done pretending to be anything but who she is. Yet there's still some lingering affection, a sense that they want to trust each other even if they know they can't. Catwoman's dubious morality is especially well handled, and that ending is just pitch perfect. Number 65, Avatar. Ra's al Ghul resurrects an ancient mummy queen. This is some of the most the series ever embraced supernatural spookiness, and the Mummy herself is just the right mix of horror and goofiness for a classic monster. I also really love the way Batman is lit in the Mummy's tomb. That brown hue just looks great. The episode itself doesn't quite match the globetrotting adventure of some of the earlier Ra's episodes, but the fact that Bruce adventures alongside Ra's daughter Talia does add some spice, especially at the end, where despite his help, Talia leaves Batman stranded in the desert when she learns he plans to turn her father in. Desert or not, that shit's cold. I also love that Ra's minion Ubu, who has been a consistent enemy that seems to openly loathe Batman, throws the Dark Knight a canteen of water in the end. An unspoken thank you for Batman saving Ubu's life earlier. I love me a good respect spot. Number 64, Mad as a Hatter. The Mad Hatter doesn't quite make the cut among the series' top-tier villains, but his origin episode sure does a lot to make a case for him. For starters, you've got the great Roddy McDowall providing the voice, and the man does an excellent job bringing Hatter's sense of whimsy while underlying it with real menace. Paul Dini's script was reportedly based on a shooting spree committed by a man infatuated by a younger coworker, and this episode manages to be true to those ideas while remaining tasteful. There's no need to cross into exploitative territory when McDowall can get so much out of the line,
"I'll cut that cowl off your neck before you'll take her. I've waited my whole lonely life for her."
That Hatter's mind control power renders Alice a lifeless husk works as pointed commentary of both the possessive attitudes of men like Hatter and how the men who harbor such attitudes destroy the objects of their affection. Shirley Walker also knocks another villain theme out of the park here, and the episode folds its serious themes with its Alice in Wonderland motif very effectively. Number 63, Off Balance. This is another episode that pairs Batman and Talia, and is in fact the first suggestion of the League of Shadows. That's a big part of what makes Off Balance special. The show's episodic nature is largely a strength, as it allows for a lot of variety, but it also means we don't really get long-form stories. The Ra's al Ghul saga is a big exception, teased as a menacing power throughout this episode and formally introduced in its closing seconds, a tantalizing tease for the epic to come. Taken strictly on its own merits, Off Balance is still a cool episode. Working with a villain named Count Vertigo encouraged the creators to indulge in nods to Alfred Hitchcock, and beyond the obvious visual references, there's a certain Hitchcockian ingenuity to the set pieces. It helps that Vertigo's powers are pretty well realized. Finally, this first appearance of Talia is also her best. While later episodes depict her as a little too nice, she really feels like a mysterious and dangerous femme fatale here. Far more threatening and alluring. Number 62, Batgirl Returns. Batgirl Returns was the last episode of the original run of Batman the Animated Series, and I think that fosters undue expectations of some grand series finale. This is not that, and it's also not just another episode. Bruce Wayne himself only appears very briefly in a phone call with Robin. The rest of the episode focusing on Batgirl reluctantly tagging with Catwoman to solve a robbery. As the ending to a beloved series, that's minor and disappointing. As a fun little side story though, Batgirl Returns is quite good. This is basically the closest the series ever gave us to the Birds of Prey, and it's a very fruitful dynamic. Catwoman gets a young innocent to aid and possibly exploit, while Batgirl needs to show independence and stay true to her character. There's this fantastic moment near the end where Catwoman pitches the two team up permanently, and you really see Batgirl falling for the idea, until Catwoman insults Commissioner Gordon, unaware that's Batgirl's father. It's a great test of character, and it does result in growth. Number 61, The Forgotten. Batman goes undercover and disguises himself to investigate a disappearing homeless population, only to himself be kidnapped by a villain who's been using kidnapped homeless people as slave labor at a mining camp. In the scuffle, Bruce has his head knocked, and when he wakes up, he can't remember who he is. I admire the episode's willingness to address social problems like homelessness, but it does also mean the writers are tackling big issues that they can't meaningfully resolve in a 22-minute cartoon where Batman also has to punch some guys. The remote setting and amnesia also means we're missing out on a lot of the show's best attributes. On the plus side, though, the story and setting are very distinct from the rest of the series. And more importantly, the episode features 2 standout dream sequences where Bruce is trying to rediscover who he is. The first has a funhouse mirror Bruce Wayne, laughing maniacally until he transforms into the Joker and pulls Bruce down into the streets of Gotham with him. The second scene is triggered when a fellow prisoner cries that he's lost his family, prompting Bruce's memories to come flooding back, in turn distilling his origin into a series of simple images. Family, tragedy, and the dark night born from it. It's haunting and powerful, and also unreal at building hype. I am ready to watch Batman kick some ass. Number 60, You Scratch My Back. After teasing an older Dick Grayson, we finally get a proper introduction to Nightwing, and it's quite good. I could do without the mullet, but it does visually distinguish Nightwing from both his Robin persona and the other characters. The tension he has with both Batman and Batgirl hits an honest note that builds intrigue as to what happened between them, and that tension is well exploited by Catwoman, who starts actively seducing Nightwing. The inherent perversion of Selina essentially dating her ex's son is played up just enough without being overly emphasized, and the script is also really tight, for once taking advantage of its expanded cast rather than sagging under their weight. Catwoman herself is a highlight too. It's a shame her revamped design feels so much less human than her original look, because this episode and Cult of the Cat really get her character. Number 59, Double Talk. The villain reform episode I didn't talk about in my video on the subject. Why didn't I, you may ask? Mostly because I wanted to stick to the original series run for a consistent animation style. This is significant to that formula though, because unlike every other villain, the ventriloquist actually stays reformed by the end, though not without facing considerable obstacles. The premise here is that the doctors at Arkham have helped Arnold work through his personality disorder and abandon the Mr. Scarface persona. That's a problem for his old gang, however. Scarface was the brains of the organization, and if they want to get back on top, they've got to torment Arnold into a mental breakdown all over again. It's a good story, and you really feel for Arnold struggling to get control of his life back, and it's both cathartic when he overcomes Scarface, and a little scary. This is another episode held back by bad villain redesigns, however. Scarface looks alright, but I really don't like what they've done to the ventriloquist. The old design managed to look both peculiar and ordinary in a way that the softer, blander design does not. Number 58, Sideshow. From a villain reform story to an episode that teases a villain reform story, but never quite goes there. While fleeing in the woods from Batman, Killer Croc finds himself at an isolated farmhouse occupied by former Sideshow performers, who lead a quiet and peaceful life in seclusion. Not knowing who Croc is and seeing him in chains, the group take him in as a member of the family without question. There's a strong layer of tension running throughout the episode, given we know how dangerous Croc is, and it's amplified by the fact that Croc does seem genuinely touched by their affection at points, and you find yourself wondering if he'll have some sort of redemption. Before we even get to the farm, though, there's a thrilling foot chase through the woods made 10 times more exciting by the lack of music. The episode never quite gets into that higher gear of character drama, but it is undeniably solid. Number 57, The Ultimate Thrill. Hot take, Roxy Rocket is a wildly underrated original villain from this series. A former stunt woman who gets off on danger is basically a perfect foil to Batman. And rewatching this episode as an adult, it's shocking how far the show was able to push the sexual dimension of the character. You'd assume the phallic imagery of Roxy riding around on a giant rocket would be enough, but her dialogue, movement, and voice work from Charity James all exude sexuality. The character design is also a fun throwback to old Hollywood stunt work. Though speaking of designs, perhaps this is a good time to mention, I really don't like the Penguin's new look. This seems one of the more liked redesigns, given the series could do the Dick Sprang-inspired sophisticated gentleman look from the comics, rather than the Tim Burton-inspired grotesque monster, but I prefer the latter. That the old version of the Penguin could have such an extreme look and still exude class in his speech, fashion, and appreciation for art adds a strange admirability to the character, that he did not allow his appearance to dictate who he became. I miss that. This episode is still good, though. Number 56, Zatanna. This is another sort of crossover episode, with Batman joining forces with the magician Zatanna, another character from DC Comics. The adventure the pair go on together is good fun, and Julie Brown is delightful as Zatanna, but what I really love is how this episode fleshes out Bruce Wayne's training. Given Batman is always working his way out of elaborate death traps, it stands to reason he'd need to have been taught by an escape artist. This episode fills in that backstory, with a young Bruce training under Zatanna's father, Zatara, himself a superhero from the golden age of comics in the 1930s. That's just such a great addition to Batman's backstory, and the teenage romance teased in the flashback is cute in a way that we don't often get from Batman stories. Number 55, Judgment Day. The actual final episode of Batman the Animated Series, and one that feels almost like a classic episode, despite the revamp animation. There are no sidekicks, just Batman investigating a mystery and confronting the villain. The villain in question is the Judge, an original character and self-appointed hero of Gotham, setting out to murder the supervillains who terrorize the city. The episode is marred by the fact that they couldn't actually have the Judge kill anyone, which is a shame. He definitely could have killed Riddler. Look at that new design. The writers clearly had no plans for him, even if they did end up making more episodes. Still, the story works, and the mystery is compelling. So much so that I'm putting up a spoiler warning now, because to fully address this episode, I need to talk about the twist, which is both a strength and a weakness. So, the big twist is that the Judge is in fact Two-Face. Harvey Dent, in his guilt and shame for his crimes, created a third persona to punish the guilty, even going as far as unknowingly trying to kill himself. I love that idea. It's such a perfect continuation of Harvey's tragic story, culminating on this gutting image of Two-Face alone in his cell, perpetually judging himself. What I don't love is how little of a shit Batman seems to give. Harvey was Bruce's best friend, but you'd never guess that here. Compare Batman's anguish to seeing Harvey disfigured for the first time, or his enduring hope that his friend will one day be okay in prior episodes, to his reaction when he learns the Judge is Two-Face.
Recognize any names?
Good lord.
It is the worst example of Batman as passive character in the New Adventures, and it holds Judgment Day back. Number 54, Harley's Holiday. I've been pretty open about loving the villain reform episodes, and what's great about this one is how it sends up the formula. Harley Quinn's release from Arkham immediately goes south due to a miscommunication at a department store, so Harley has to go full-on supervillain, and in the process, runs afoul of Batman and Robin, Harvey Bullock, the Mafia, and an army general. What follows is a madcap chase through Gotham that plays a bit like a screwball comedy with superheroes thrown in. It's a zany ride that still builds to a touching end, with Batman extending kindness to Harley. Of course, we can't get too serious, so it actually ends on a bit of comedy where Harley plants a big ol' smooch on Batman, which is also fun.
Call me.
Don't press your luck.
Number 53, Night of the Ninja. Another episode dealing with Bruce Wayne's training before returning to Gotham, and this is the big one. A look back at his time in Japan learning martial arts. That's in flashback, mind you. The main story sees Kyodai Ken, a rival from that time in Bruce's life, arriving in Gotham to seek revenge on Bruce, not knowing that he is in fact Batman. The highlight of the episode are definitely the flashbacks, which aren't exactly mind-blowing, but it's very satisfying to see glimpses of Bruce's training, especially his unyielding determination. Kyodai himself proves an effective villain, a ninja capable of going toe-to-toe with Batman and a perfect foil to the Dark Knight, someone whose skills serve himself rather than others. It was also a smart move to pivot so much of the story around Robin, with his inadequacies next to Batman mirroring Bruce's next to Kyodai. It gives the episode an additional character conflict beyond beating the bad guy. The actual fight scenes could have been a bit better, but thankfully, this is not the last we'll see of Kyodai Ken. Number 52, Joker's Wild. A Joker-themed casino is frankly just fun on its face, and the episode has a good time playing with that imagery. But what I really like is casino mogul Cameron Kaiser's motivations for making a Joker casino. It turns out, Kaiser was going to make a Camelot-inspired casino, but blew all his money, so pivoted to a Joker theme, knowing the Clown Prince of Crime would take umbrage and destroy it, and Kaiser could cash in his insurance policy. That's real thoughtful justification, and I love Joker's response when Batman explains that he's played right into Kaiser's hands.
I hate it when you make sense.
I love this line so much, I've occasionally found myself repeating it in my personal life. Number 51, Appointment in Crime Alley. One of the things I love most about Batman the Animated Series is the willingness to allow for stories where Batman isn't fighting supervillains, and this is a prime example. No one's building a super weapon or enacting an elaborate revenge scheme. A greedy industrialist is simply forcing poor residents out of an impoverished neighborhood so he can seize the land and enrich himself. That this episode takes place on the streets where Thomas and Martha Wayne were murdered and ends with Batman visiting the site of their death is not just a means of adding greater emotional heft. It reflects that stories like this are the essence of who Batman is. The fundamental goal of his mission is not to beat up the bad guys. It's to help people in need. Good people live in Crime Alley, and they are worth saving. And the fact that this episode can touch so profoundly to the heart and soul of Batman and still not crack the top 50 episodes is itself a testament to how great this show is. Number 50, Growing Pains. Robin tries to help a homeless runaway escape from her criminal father. This episode allows the new Robin to grow as a character by putting him through a rather arduous test and tragedy, and that alone would make it among the higher echelon of the revamp era. But what really seals the deal is the big twist. I would really recommend skipping ahead if you haven't seen this episode, as it does a very good job giving clues without totally blowing the secret, and the reveal and its implications are definitely worth going in blind. For you see, it turns out that the criminal father is in fact Clayface, and his daughter is really a part of himself that he's looking to reabsorb to return to full strength. It's a compelling extension of the character, and the scene where he successfully merges back is both heartbreaking and one of the most disturbing things the show ever did. The only thing holding the episode back is the animation style. Clayface's character design is pretty similar to how he looked before, but the more rigid line work hinders the drippy grossness the character used to have. I also can't help but roll my eyes at Alfred chastising Batman for keeping a tracer in Robin's utility belt.
Ah, you still keep a tracer in his utility belt. He's right. You do treat him like a child.
That shit would have come in handy in Return of the Joker. Nice going, Jeeves. Number 49, Make 'em Laugh. A series of TV comedians set to judge a stand-up contest find themselves committing crimes in low-rent supervillain costumes, but cannot account for these actions. Turns out this is all part of a scheme by the Joker, using the Mad Hatter's mind control technology as revenge on the judges for rejecting his stand-up bit years prior. That's all well and good, but the real star here are these wannabe costumed extremists, genuinely funny in their silly attempts at supervillainy. The gold standard is, of course, the Condiment King. A bad guy wielding ketchup and mustard guns feels like the kind of joke a 10-year-old would make, and the disbelief he expresses when he has to fight Batman always makes me laugh.
Let's see if you can cut the mustard. Quiet. You hit me.
Number 48, Legends of the Dark Knight. My favorite iteration of Batman the Animated Series in its late period gimmick era. The concept here is that kids tell stories of what they think Batman is like, with each presented in a different comic book style. The first sees Batman and Robin thwart Joker's attempt to rob a music store, animated in the style of Dick Sprang Batman comics from the 40s and 50s. The second adapts Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, and sees Batman fighting the mutant leader. Each segment does a great job capturing the look and tone of the comic book style it's aping, and it's very fun to see the series flex such diversity and variation from their typical house style. Credit as well to whoever had the brilliant idea of casting Michael Ironside as Dark Knight Returns Batman.
You don't get it, son. This isn't a trash heap. It's an operating table. And I'm the surgeon.
It's so good. If the episode has any downside, it's that the finale, where the real Batman fights Firefly in an abandoned movie theater, is pretty lame, something Bruce Timm himself agrees with. I'd have much rather seen the creators tackle a third art style from the comics, especially given the range of options they could have drawn from. There's also some digs at Joel Schumacher and Batman Forever, which are steeped in homophobia and hit an ugly note. Number 47, POV. Here we have another episode where multiple characters give their interpretation of Batman, except this time it's different cops telling their perspective on a drug bust Batman was involved with. In other words, it's the series Rashomon episode. The various stories are less showy than those in Legends of the Dark Knight, but I really like the texture they add to the world, and demonstrating how, to normal people, Batman feels like a genuine supernatural creature of the night. As one of the earliest episodes, POV also establishes an important precedent, that non-superhero characters are still important to this series. Another thing POV shares with the last episode is that the action climax is largely perfunctory, but I think this one ties into the overall story more strongly. Number 46, Tiger Tiger. Don't let the William Blake reference confuse you. Tiger Tiger is pure pulp, a mashup of The Island of Dr. Moreau and The Most Dangerous Game, where Batman contends with an evil scientist who's created a 7-foot-tall Catman named Tigress and has turned Catwoman into a literal cat-human hybrid to serve as his monster's bride. This is basically catnip if you're into the Universal Monsters style of horror of the 1930s, as that atmosphere is all over the place. I'm also convinced evil scientist Emile Dorian's design is at least partially inspired by Dr. Pretorius from Bride of Frankenstein. And crucially, like the best Universal monster movies, the episode is ultimately sympathetic to its monster, and treats his tragedy with utter conviction. Number 45, Second Chance. Harvey Dent's rehabilitation is at hand. The man set for a surgery that will heal the physical scars of Two-Face to match his work overcoming the mental scars. Alas, Dent is kidnapped. The middle of the episode is an investigation into who kidnapped Harvey, with Batman and Robin each pursuing separate leads. This plotline is what holds the episode back, as both are red herrings which largely exist to add some plotting and action. In the third act, Batman confronts the real culprit, who is, spoilers ahead, Two-Face himself, not allowing Harvey to banish his split personality. That aspect of the episode is a fantastic extension of Harvey's tragedy, and the drama of Batman making a final, desperate plea to save his friend, and coming so close only to still fail, really resonates. The ingredients of a great episode are here, but it's bogged down by a pointless mystery. Ditch the red herrings, maybe include some flashbacks to flesh out Bruce and Harvey's old friendship, and you'd have a real winner. As is, though, Second Chance is still powerful. Number 44, A Bullet for Bullock. An unknown assassin is trying to kill Harvey Bullock. This is another episode with a semi-perfunctory mystery, but here it serves to provide some plot scaffolding to an episode which mostly exists to get a closer look at Bullock's slovenly lifestyle. It's a fun peek into his character with a good sense of humor, and while the twist is predictable, the ending is very amusing. The real ace in the hole here, though, is the music, the episode spotting a fantastic jazzy score that won a well-deserved Emmy. Number 43, The Clock King. The general formula for villain origin stories in Batman the Animated Series was a vulnerable person abused or exploited by a rich industrialist or powerful Gotham City official and becoming a supervillain in part for revenge. I'm not knocking it, as it produced some fantastic episodes, but it was a formula, and as such, I'm glad it got its send-up with the Clock King. We have here our regular guy in Temple Fugit, who is screwed over by the mayor in such a way that ruins Temple's life, and he swears revenge. Except all the mayor did is encourage Temple to take it easy and not follow such a strict schedule, only for Temple to take his lunch off that schedule, prompting a series of comical mishaps which result in a missed court date that leaves Temple in financial ruin. It's openly silly, something the episode plays up in both the exaggerated animation and in the Clock King admitting the real reason he hates the mayor is because he caused Temple to be late. What I especially like is that the episode isn't openly comedic. It's just underlined by a slight absurdity. Number 42, Never Fear. Most every villain redesign of the revamp era was a downgrade, but there was one big exception in the Scarecrow. Scarecrow had actually been redesigned already during the original series, but with the new adventures, the show shifted to this Western preacher come zombie vibe. He looks awesome, and new actor Jeffrey Combs' voice matches the design perfectly. It also helps that Never Fear has a really strong hook for a Scarecrow episode. Rather than a toxin which causes fear, this one takes all fear away, and thus leaves the victim totally lacking any inhibitions. When Batman breathes it in, it causes him to no longer fear breaking his moral code, so he's fully out to kill his enemies, forcing Robin to have to take Batman down and try to stop Scarecrow himself. This is one time having a kid Robin is a real asset, as the character's age makes him feel especially vulnerable against Batman in a way Dick Grayson wouldn't. One nitpick, there's a bit where Batman goes undercover with a criminal alias to get the lowdown on the plot, which, no biggie, Batman does this all the time, except in earlier episodes, he had a full-on disguise. Here, he just wears the usual threads he wears as Bruce Wayne while rocking a pencil mustache. It is ridiculous that this counts as going undercover. Number 41, Pretty Poison. She doesn't always get the acclaim as a Joker or a Mr. Freeze, but Poison Ivy was one of the best villains in Batman the Animated Series, and Pretty Poison serves an excellent introduction to both her eco-terrorist motivations and her role as dangerous seductress. That Ivy's target in this case is Harvey Dent allows for a plot that hits closer to Bruce personally, and allows the show to build Harvey as a character before he becomes Two-Face. The episode also scratches the itch for Batman as a detective while also ending in more comic booky fashion, as Batman does battle with a giant plant monster, in a fight which gets quite desperate for the Dark Knight. It's a great example of how the series could achieve a Goldilocks just right mix of serious and silly when it came to Batman stories. Number 40, Heart of Steel. Most of Batman's two-part episodes were more complex stories that really needed double the time to convey their drama. Heart of Steel isn't really that. The plot does have its complications, I suppose, but the core of it is some pulp science fiction about an evil supercomputer attempting to replace humanity with robots. As with many of the sci-fi episodes, I'm impressed by how the series managed to adapt the high-tech with the lo-fi retro aesthetics their Gotham City aspires to. The robots here don't look like throwbacks exactly, but there's a certain jank that I appreciate, and fits well within the Art Deco look. I especially like that supercomputer Hardak is positively massive. The presence of robots also allows the directors and storyboard artists to really cut loose with some violent action scenes, since no person is actually getting hurt. At the risk of sounding like a sick man, I enjoy that a lot. There's also a Body Snatchers vibe to the story, with people acting strange, and it adds a mystery element to the episode in addition to the thrill of heavy metal smashing. And as the cherry on top, the episode also introduces Barbara Gordon, establishing her personality before she becomes Batgirl. Number 39, The Mechanic. You remember that part in Batman Returns when the Penguin hijacks the Batmobile and pilots it remotely? This is that, but as a full episode. The scenario is tense, and the solution to it is pretty clever, much more so than in Batman Returns, where Batman just punches a hole in the floor. But the real treat is how the story fleshes out an aspect of Batman's world by introducing us to the man that designed and maintains the Batmobile. I like that attention to detail. Batman may be smart, but he doesn't know everything. It makes sense he'd need a mechanic to assist with that aspect of crime fighting, and Earl Cooper proves a very likable character with an interesting story of his own. I don't necessarily need to know who pumps the Batmobile's tires, but it is fun to fill in that gap, especially when it allows for a strong story. There's also this insane bit where Penguin sends this pencil-pushing dweeb who led him to Earl up the river in his mechanical duck, all while the guy screams hysterically.
Excuse me! I'm expected back at the office!
It's such a weird gag, but my brother and I thought it was the funniest thing we'd ever seen as kids, and it still cracks me up. Number 38, Showdown. Showdown might well be benefiting greatly in this list from being so vastly different than the rest of the series that it stands out by default. Batman is not the main character here. Most of the plot isn't even set in Gotham City. It's set in the Old West, because we've got a proper Western here, with bounty hunter Jonah Hex hunting down fugitive Arcady Duval, a quest which leads to epic battles on steampunk zeppelins and a sinister plot to destroy the railroad and conquer Washington. Now, a Western where no one is allowed to get shot is going to be a tad constrained, but the genre mashup still appeals to me greatly, and it's nice to get a totally different type of adventure from this series. I should also note that Showdown isn't just a break for fun. The story does connect back to the main series and fleshes out one of Batman's greatest villains in a pretty interesting way. Number 37, The Cat and the Claw. There are 2 episodes in The Cat and the Claw, and I don't just mean because it's a 2-parter. One episode is about how Batman and Catwoman first cross paths, and it's largely excellent. The push and pull between them is immediately palpable, the drama only getting richer as their alter egos also become involved, neither the wiser to the other's true self. Scenes like their rooftop chases are great fun, and Adrienne Barbeau feels like a formidable counterpoint to Conroy's Batman. There's also a bit where Bruce admits to Selina that he hasn't felt this way about anyone in a long time, and in a post-Mask of the Phantasm world, it would seem certain that line is referring to Andrea, which just makes Batman and Catwoman's doomed romance all the more tragic. Unfortunately, the other episode is about Red Claw, evil terrorist and generally boring baddie who Bats and Catwoman need to team up to stop. It's not awful or anything, but it feels like a great episode is being intruded on by a mediocre one. Number 36, Birds of a Feather. The first of the series' many villain reform episodes, and a rather good one, with the Penguin functionally the protagonist in this tale of a rich socialite who invites Oswald Cobblepot into her social circle on a lark. What impresses me most is how well this episode balances tone. There's a lot of comedy to be mined from both Penguin's inflated opinion of himself and his utterly inappropriate behavior in high society, and a lot of it is very funny, but the story is ultimately tragic. Veronica's game is just so cruel, and especially as a kid, it's very easy to feel for the Penguin. Sure, he hijacked a stealth helicopter to rain down terror on Gotham City, but Veronica and Pierce are mean. And isn't that the real crime? Probably not, but it's amazing that an episode full of fish-out-of-water comedy and a climax where Penguin rides a fire-breathing model dragon can end on such a melancholic note. Number 35, Nothing to Fear. I came very close to ranking this episode much lower. Scarecrow's original design is pretty lame, and the character comes off more like an obnoxious bookworm than the master of fear. But where this episode struggles with its villain, it tells a fantastic Batman story. Batman gets exposed to the fear gas early, and spends the rest of the episode being haunted by visions of his father, professing his disappointment in his son, culminating with the rightfully iconic scene where Batman stands up to the visions and affirms his sense of self.
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman!
This is all the more powerful when you consider this was the first time the series had addressed Batman's parents, and while it doesn't explicitly explain what happened to the Waynes, the weight of their loss is tangibly felt. The wordless final scene where Bruce visits the grave of his parents, complete with some stirring music, is among the most powerful scenes of the entire series. It tells the viewer everything they need to know about what motivates Batman without saying a word. You can get away with a lot when you have scenes this good. And with that, we move into the final tier. Number 34, Over the Edge. Batgirl is killed in battle. Gordon discovers she's actually his daughter and blames his old friend for her death, waging war against Batman and the Bat family. It's probably not much of a spoiler if I say things aren't exactly what they seem, but the episode telegraphs that pretty early, so it's hard to be bitter when it turns out Batgirl isn't really dead. Moreover, the writers used the opportunity to tell a very compelling what-if story. It's disturbing to see Batman and Gordon as enemies after years of friendship, and the story just gets bleaker as it goes. The episode also takes advantage of the expanded cast of the revamp era, and in fact would not have been possible in the old style. And for all the smack I've talked about the character designs of this era, I can't deny that the animators really knocked this episode out of the park. Movement is fluid and with all sorts of little details that really sing. Number 33, Catwalk. Early Catwoman episodes defined her motivations as environmentalist, the character a less extreme Poison Ivy, concerned with preservation of animals and wildlife rather than plants. What I love about Catwalk is that it does away with this pretense. Very literally, in fact, when Catwoman discards the remains of an extinct cat in order to escape Batman. Catwoman doesn't steal to save animals. She doesn't even steal for its monetary rewards. Not primarily, anyway. She steals because she loves it. It's who she is, as irrevocably as crime fighting is who Batman is. This is the episode that finally arrives at the compulsion that makes Selina perfect for Bruce, yet forever out of reach. And as an added bonus, the catalysts for the story are the ventriloquist and Mr. Scarface. And I love those guys.
I don't think anyone's talking to you!
Number 32, The Last Laugh. If any episode in this list is being propped up by nostalgia, it's this one. The Last Laugh is far from the deepest or most emotionally resonant Batman episode. In fact, it's among the most straightforwardly silly and comic book stories the show ever told. The Joker drives around a barge of garbage, which spreads his laughing gas through Gotham City, allowing he and his goons to go on a crime spree so Batman fights him. Why is this episode among the greats? Well, because it has some awesome original music, great set pieces, some fantastic line deliveries,
You killed Captain Clown!
and a giant robot named Captain Clown. Sometimes it really is the simple things in life. Number 31, Shadow of the Bat. After being introduced in Heart of Steel, Barbara Gordon finally makes the transition to Batgirl. That being said, one of the greatest strengths of Shadow of the Bat is that it doesn't just feel like it exists to introduce a new sidekick. It's a legitimate crime epic. We open on the arrest of Rupert Thorne, a seemingly massive win for the people of Gotham, until Commissioner Gordon is arrested on suspicion of taking bribes from Thorne. It's perhaps easy as a fan to say that, well, obviously Gordon's innocent, but I really love how the writers generate a lot of ambiguity on that front, with the ultimate conspiracy proving rather elaborate. It's also a really organic way to get Barbara involved as Batgirl while still being semi-independent of Batman and Robin. The episode also confirms that Robin is a Humphrey Bogart fan.
Hey, I didn't miss a Bogart festival in film class just to sit on my butt here while you hit the streets.
And I appreciate seeing young people repping the classics. Number 30, Day of the Samurai. Night of the Ninja is a very good episode, but it was missing a few things, namely Batman and Kyodai Ken doing battle next to an active volcano. In all seriousness, the improvement in the fight scenes goes a long way, given the story functions similar to a martial arts movie, complete with the plot revolving around a secret death touch that Kyodai seeks to master, and the culminating battle between adversaries does feel suitably epic. The primary appeal here is mostly style, but the episode also gives Bruce a nice little arc, not only overcoming an enemy who once defeated him, but reconciling the teachings of his sensei with his own code of honor as Batman. Number 29, Mad Love. Easily the best episode of the new Batman adventures, perhaps because it was adapted from a comic by Paul Dini and Bruce Timm from around the time of the original series. In essence, this is Harley Quinn's origin story, told in flashback as she tries to reconcile what her life has become and how she can finally make Joker happy. The abusive nature of Joker and Harley's relationship had been touched on here and there, but this episode really dials in on the psychological manipulation Joker exerts over Harley, and it's genuinely upsetting. What's even more screwed up is that Batman taps into those very same insecurities to perform some manipulation of his own when he's captured, and I like the willingness to show Batman's cruelty without drawing too much attention to it. But it's that empathy for Harley that really makes this episode soar. If this were done in the original style, it might well have cracked the top 10. Number 28, His Silicon Soul, a sequel to Heart of Steel that offers a far more emotional, character-driven story. A final robot duplicate of Hardak is discovered, one of Batman himself, except this robot thinks he's the real Batman. What follows is an existential crisis as this artificial intelligence comes to grips with his own inhumanity and struggles when his programming to revive Hardak and replace all human beings with robots conflicts with Batman's no-kill rule. This leads to an amazing finale where Batman pushes that conflict to its limits. Superhero stories usually have some version of the hero fighting a mirror image of themselves, and this one is an underrated gem of that genre. Number 27, Christmas with the Joker. I love this episode on its own merits as a Christmas-themed Joker episode, full of great set pieces and excitement, but this also serves an important purpose for the series as a whole. This was the second episode of Batman the Animated Series, following on Leather Wings. That episode was dark, atmospheric, and a little bit scary. This episode is a more straightforwardly fun Batman and Robin romp, embracing comic book silliness like a rocket-powered Christmas tree and the heroes fighting giant tin toy soldiers. Together, the two episodes show the range of Batman experiences the series will encompass, from the darkest and most brooding to the most lighthearted and frivolous. Which is not to say Christmas with the Joker is a complete lark. The Joker does have a trio of hostages he's threatening to kill, but its goals are primarily to be fun. And it is fun. In addition to the set pieces, there's also all sorts of great little details, like Joker's one-off Perry Como outfit, or the running thread of Robin trying to sit Batman down to watch It's a Wonderful Life.
You know, I've never seen that. I could never get past the title.
Dick Grayson the Cinephile strikes again. Number 26, Mudslide. Mudslide starts out as a pretty routine episode. Clayface is stealing things, Batman is trying to stop him. The animation for Clayface is fantastic, but otherwise, there's not much to suggest this is going to be one of the great episodes. But then you get to the ending, where Clayface is about to take a serum that will increase his powers so much that he can live in his human form full-time. Seconds away from becoming Matt Hagen again, of having a life back, Batman turns the machine off. And technically, this is still routine Batman. The villain stole something, and the hero is preventing him from using it. But looked at up close, Batman has essentially doomed Clayface to forever be a monster. And as an added irony, the chemical which Clayface stole to do this in the first place was produced by Wayne Enterprises. Bruce owns it. He could just let this go guilt-free, but his duties as Batman prevent him from doing so. The episode doesn't overemphasize the point, but this is a rather damning critique of how rigid and harmful Batman's moral code really is, and the fact that the writers make that critique without overtly condemning Batman's actions is phenomenal storytelling. Number 25, Read My Lips. Mr. Freeze may have been the Batman villain most dramatically transformed by Batman the Animated Series, but other members of the Rogues Gallery also got a glow up, with the ventriloquist being one of the best. In the comics, at least in the comics of the 90s, the ventriloquist wasn't actually a very good ventriloquist. Mr. Scarface really struggling with certain letters. But in the show, Arnold Wesker is an exceptional ventriloquist. He and Mr. Scarface are completely believable as two separate characters with dramatically different voices, a feat all the more impressive given it's the same actor doing the voice for both. That ability to buy the puppet as its own character makes the climax, where Batman uses ventriloquism to turn Scarface against his puppeteer, unreasonably convincing. I actually have to remind myself that this is really one guy fighting against himself. There are other charms to Read My Lips, like the great score, but the main appeal is the introduction to a new villain, quickly established as among the series' best. Number 24, Trial. Batman's deadliest enemies putting the Dark Knight on trial in the middle of Arkham Asylum is a fantastic hook for an episode, and it's a ton of fun seeing all the many villain personalities clashing.
I'd like that last statement stricken from the record, please.
Record? Is someone supposed to be writing this down?
I object to this witness. She's obviously trying to influence the judge.
What makes you say that?
He should have let me bump off Harvey Dent. We'd all have been better off, wouldn't we, Harv?
You're beautiful when you're angry.
What makes Trial one of the greats, though, is the narrative which unfolds from that premise. The district attorney the villain's assigned to defend Batman herself believes Batman is a vigilante and no better than the criminals he fights. But if she loses the case, she and Batman will be killed, so she has to make arguments on his behalf anyways. And in doing so, the DA comes to value and appreciate Batman and all he does for the city, and recognize how his villains, sympathetic though some of them may be, ultimately bear responsibility for their own choices. It's an effective story on its own terms, and all the more powerful in the greater pantheon of Batman stories. Much as I love a good introspective and critical take on the Caped Crusader, it's also nice to see a story which firmly declares Batman is a hero, and his actions are a benefit.
The truth is, you created him.
Number 23, Harley and Ivy. Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn have become such a prominent duo act in DC Comics and other Batman media that it's easy to forget what a left-field odd couple pairing they first were. Pitched by writer Paul Dini on something of a whim, Harley and Ivy played a key role in fleshing out both characters. For Harley, the episode elaborated on the complex relationship with the Joker while also expanding her into a character who could be more than just a henchgirl, a pivotal step in Harley's ascendancy in popularity. For Ivy, the episode was humanizing, providing something for her to care about beyond her eco-terrorist mission. To fully commit to the Thelma and Louise-esque women on the run narrative, the episode wisely treats its titular duo as the main characters, with Batman only a background player, who isn't even responsible for the criminal's defeat in the end. As an added bonus, the animation is even better than usual, with some exceptional bits of business that really bring the drawings to life. Number 22, If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich? There are two major elements which make If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich a top-shelf Batman episode. The first is how it introduces the Riddler as a villain, maintaining the character's colorful look and obsession with puzzles, while also tempering his personality. Far from the manic energy of Frank Gorshin, this Riddler exudes more of a smug superiority. He's smarter than you, and he knows it. John Glover's voice work is also excellent, betraying a darkness which underlines the Riddler's intelligence. The second standout element is simply how fun the bulk of the episode is. After some simpler riddles in Act 2, Act 3 consists of Batman and Robin running an elaborate theme park maze full of death traps to test the dynamic duo's wits. It's a great way to give Riddler's puzzles a pronounced physical danger, and it also allows the show to embrace its comic book roots. As an added bonus, Riddler more or less accomplishes everything he sets out to, and eludes capture from the heroes, effectively putting him over as a major new villain. Number 21, Eternal Youth. One of the strengths of Batman's deep roster of villains is the variety of genres different personalities invite. Poison Ivy's combination of righteous vengeance wreaked upon those who destroy the environment and experimentation with plants invites horror, and that's an area Eternal Youth delivers in. The opening tease of Ivy chasing down a woman with its insert shots of racing footsteps sets the precedent for a sort of slasher, with Ivy hunting down and picking off her enemies. It's a heart-pounding intro, but one that leaves a mystery, since we don't actually know what Ivy does to her victim. That mystery unravels not primarily with Batman, but Alfred, who accepts Bruce Wayne's invitation to a health spa, not realizing it's being run by Ivy, punishing rich industrialists for their environmental damage. The exact details are teased out slowly, but the final reveal is, spoilers ahead, Ivy turning those industrialists into trees. It's simple, but incredibly creepy and a nicely ironic punishment for their sins. Aiding the horror is the way the chemicals Ivy is pumping into her guests slowly seduce Alfred, and Batman's expression of terror when he realizes his ally is in danger.
Alfred? Alfred! Alfred! Alfred!
Number 20, Feet of Clay. Looked at simply as a script, Feet of Clay is pretty good. Like many villain origin stories, the plot involves an exploitable person screwed over by a rich guy and transformed into a villain who seeks revenge. Feet of Clay tells that story quite well. Spread across 2 parts, the episode effectively conveys what a bastard Daggett is and creates a lot of sympathy for Hagen as a disfigured actor desperate for any way to continue his career. There's also an engaging framing plotline and a great scene where Batman interrogates a germaphobe in a hospital. On paper, the episode is very, very good, but it's the animation which makes Feet of Clay one of the greats. Clayface's transformation effects are astonishing, especially in the context of a weekly aired animated series. The fluidity of motion, the level of detail over the various parts of his dripping body, the speed at which Clayface cycles through different forms, it is a degree of visual splendor unparalleled in the rest of the series or in the broader DC animated universe. Batman the Animated Series told better stories, but this is the high watermark of the show's animation. Number 19, The Demon's Quest. You can tell the showrunners really valued Ra's al Ghul, both as a character in and of himself and for the unique dynamic he brought to Batman's world. After a compelling tease and off-balance, Ra's is formally introduced to the Dark Knight, not as an enemy, but a prospective ally, seeking Batman's help in finding the people who kidnapped Robin and Talia al Ghul. Unsurprisingly, this turns out to be a ruse to test Batman's mettle physically and mentally, and gauge his potential to become the new head of the League of Shadows. So we get the unique role Ra's plays as a villain, not merely an obstacle to be thwarted like so many of Batman's rogues, but a twisted father figure in a temptation story. Ra's is a potential mentor and a fellow crusader against the perceived evils of the world. His vast resources and apocalyptic means offer Batman a way to essentially accomplish his goal and wipe out crime forever, albeit at the cost of compromising his own ethics. The scope of Ra's powers also breaks us out of the urban sprawl of Gotham City for a grand adventure that harkens to the globetrotting of Indiana Jones, and even evokes Lawrence of Arabia. It's a proper epic, and its cross of character temptation and scale climaxes on an awesome sword fight between Ra's and a shirtless but still masked Batman, and that rules. Number 18, Fire from Olympus. I don't think anyone in the world loves this episode as much as I do. A shipping tycoon who believes himself to be the Greek god Zeus could easily be disastrous, but this episode wisely understands that laughable beliefs do not disqualify the believer from being dangerous. There is no possibility that Maximilian Zeus might actually be the god of thunder, but his conviction in his own delusions makes him a formidable enemy, especially given the resources Maxie has to live out his deluded fantasy. That both Batman and the audience's entry into this character is Maxie's wife adds an element of tragedy, with this woman watching her husband lose touch with reality, and of terror as those delusions turn violent against her. Aesthetically, the episode also rules. The use of sci-fi tech is a fun way to interpret various aspects of Greek mythology, the original music is appropriately grand, the opening where Maxie strikes down an informant is highly atmospheric and really sells the idea of a Zeus LARPer as a deadly threat. Maxie Zeus would not appear in subsequent Batman episodes, but the ending where he's placed in Arkham Asylum, convinced he is among fellow gods on Mount Olympus, folds the character into Batman's world beautifully. Number 17, Beware the Grey Ghost. Famously, this episode features Adam West as the voice of a television actor who played the Grey Ghost, a costumed adventurer and hero who inspired a very young Bruce Wayne. The value of West playing a TV hero who inspired Batman speaks for itself, but what really makes the episode work is how genuinely good West's performance is. Obviously, he nails the heroic TV persona, but he also brings a weariness to Simon Trent, this washed-up actor whose career is on a downslide. In some ways, the plot is little more than window dressing to justify this meta-exploration of how fictional heroes can inspire real acts of goodness, which is certainly effective, But the mystery storyline, predicated on an old episode of the Grey Ghost TV series that Bruce remembers from childhood, now considered lost, is well thought out and rewarding. More than the style, though, more than the ode to the power of stories to inspire even, what I really love about this episode is how it fleshes out Bruce Wayne. So much of Bruce's past is cloaked in tragedy and grief. It's nice to see him get to be a normal kid, to see a memory with his father, which isn't about the pain of his loss. Beware the Grey Ghost is something Batman stories rarely are. It's sweet.
You know, as a kid, I used to watch it with my father. The Grey Ghost was my hero. Really? And he still is.
Number 16, Riddler's Reform. Batman showrunners seem to struggle with telling Riddler stories, based on their own comments and the lack of episodes which foreground the character. There are only 3 dedicated Riddler episodes across both the original series and the revamp, which is pretty wild when you consider this is one of the most famous Batman villains of all time and the main antagonist from a giant blockbuster movie around the same time. That scarcity is a real benefit, however, as all 3 Riddler episodes are distinct. His origin is a theme park adventure, his follow-up a battle in virtual reality, and his third outing a more grounded character study. Rather than elaborate puzzles, the riddles here are hidden. Riddler will say something seemingly innocuous,
but those silly riddle crimes are a thing of the past. Ancient history that's gone now. I'm a new man.
And it's only later that Batman realizes that line was telegraphing a crime.
Those were things of the past, Batman. Ancient history that's gone now. I'm a new man. But you probably won't figure that out until it's too late.
That kind of covert puzzle creates a different intellectual game for viewers, and there's a bit involving a number Riddler writes down that I utterly love. The mystery fuels a great character study of the Riddler, who seemingly has everything he could ever want, everything boss Daniel Mockridge initially stole from him. He's rich, famous, and desired, precisely because of how smart he is. But none of it matters, because it's not enough to be smart. He needs to prove he's smarter than Batman.
He's the only one worthy of the game.
It is a great story of obsession. Number 15, Harlequinade. The Joker has stolen an A-bomb. In order to find the Clown Prince of Crime before he turns Gotham into a crater, Batman enlists Harley Quinn as an ally to help think like the Joker. I described Harley's Holiday as an almost screwball comedy earlier, but this is the episode that really embraces screwball energy, with Bats as the put-upon straight man whose life is upended in comical fashion by a chaotic woman. The relationship never gets into the romantic stage, which perhaps disqualifies the story from full screwballdom, but the other ingredients are there. And more importantly, the episode captures the vibe. Batman and Harley have great comedic chemistry, and the zany scenarios escalate nicely. By the time Dick Miller shows up as a mob hood with the hots for Harley, I'm basically in heaven. Joker himself ultimately has a pretty small role, only appearing at the beginning and the end, but that just makes you savor his appearance all the more, and we get a nice mix of the homicidal maniac and the funny clown. Ditto to the final gag, which is very funny, but in a pretty mean-spirited way. Number 14, Joker's Favor. This episode is almost certainly most significant for introducing Harley Quinn, and it's remarkable how much of the character is already there. The backstory and the relationship with Joker aren't fully in place, but the playful innocence, underdog charm, and fantastic character design are already in full force, and Arlene Sorkin's voice is already chef's kiss. Harley is ultimately a bonus here, though. The real focus is the absurdity of the Joker's cruelty. Charlie Collins is your average middle-class guy, who one day flips off the wrong stranger in traffic and lives to regret it. Joker doesn't seek revenge, though. He swears Charlie to an unspecified favor in the future, and keeps tabs on him for years, waiting for the right time to cash in what Charlie owes him, like a clown-faced Vito Corleone. I won't spoil what Joker's titular favor actually is, but suffice it to say, it's laughably low-key, given Joker's elaborate stalking of Charlie. That's really what I love about the episode. It captures the simultaneous terror of the Joker's evil and the hilarious ways it manifests. The ending where Charlie snaps and turns Joker desperate is also a cathartic conclusion for Charlie's arc, an earned comeuppance for the Joker, and very funny.
Look, Charlie, you've had a busy day. All this running around, all this excitement with Batman!
Number 13, Deep Freeze. After utterly reinventing a C-lister from a goon with a freezing gimmick to a wounded soul closed off to emotion after tragedy, Batman the Animated Series further added to the Mr. Freeze mythos by revealing wife Nora had survived and is being kept alive but comatose in suspended animation. The imagery of Nora unconsciously floating in glass proved instantly iconic and has lingered throughout future Freeze appearances and adaptations. That addition to Batman's world would have been enough to secure Deep Freeze high placement, but this isn't just a great Mr. Freeze episode. It's also an episode about an evil Walt Disney who builds his own underwater utopia, supposedly free of the hatred and violence of the rest of the world, yet who also plans to exterminate the rest of the world. It's like BioShock meets The Spy Who Loved Me, but also Batman, Robin, and Mr. Freeze are there. The retro-future aesthetic of Oceania rules, and I really love how the main robot is clearly pulling from Castle in the Sky. So there's a lot of cool stuff here, but the real heart of the story is Freeze, and his love for Nora. That love initially motivates Freeze to aid the villain, but it also redeems him enough to do the right thing when the time comes. The concluding image of the pair finally together, drifting alone in the ice, is wonderfully melancholic. Number 12, Baby Doll. Series producer Alan Burnett has talked about how the best Batman villains are the ones that you both laugh at and are terrified of at the same time, and no villain captures these disparate feelings as extremely as Baby Doll. An original creation of the series, Mary Doll is a TV actress with a genetic condition that leaves her physically resembling a child, despite being deep into adulthood. Mary found some success playing the mischievous toddler Baby Doll on the TV sitcom Love That Baby, but that was a long time ago. Now washed up and yearning for the fictional life and family she once had, Mary has embraced her Baby Doll identity and has begun kidnapping her old castmates. To return to Burnett's point, this is a character that is laughable, a sitcom comedy character that could never pose any kind of physical threat to Batman and Robin, but is also terrifying in her psychology and motivations. Like a great many of Batman's villains, and indeed like Batman himself, Baby Doll is a character obsessed by making her fantasies real, no matter how implausible they actually are, and that willingness is a frightening thing. But there's a third component that Burnett didn't mention, and that's tragedy. Batman's villains are a collection of abandoned misfits, desperate for some love and affection, and Baby Doll is no exception. Afflicted with a condition which has forever robbed her of a normal life, further harmed by the cruel realities of fame, Baby Doll proves deeply sympathetic, her glimpses of vulnerability culminating in one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the entire series.
Why couldn't you just let me make believe?
Number 11, House and Garden. The best of the villain reform episodes. For a start, it really leaves the nature of the reform a mystery. Unlike other villain reform episodes, House and Garden does not make the villain its protagonist, and therefore we are left in the dark with Batman regarding how legitimate Poison Ivy's life as a suburban wife and mother really is. She certainly plays the part convincingly, but doubt nags at Batman and audience alike. Sure enough, Ivy's reform remains pretty twisted. Oh, she wants a family. It's just that family is actually comprised of plant people born out of these body snatcher pods that eventually transform into hulking monsters Ivy uses to commit crimes. The reveal of these plant babies is one of the creepiest images in the entire series, and the weird sci-fi horror is a big reason I love this episode so much. It's not just creepy for creepiness' sake, however. This whole strand is a great representation of Ivy's character, a utilization of her plant gimmick that reflects her need for utter dominance and control. As she puts it,
I meant it when I said I wanted a family that loves me. I just wanted it on my terms.
It's that understanding of character that makes the ending a little sad, despite how twisted Ivy's methods were. Like, sure, it's wrong to imprison someone and make plant baby clones from their DNA. I get that. But there's also something admirable to Ivy's commitment to having a family without sacrificing her sense of self. And I love that the episode leans into the sadness of losing that. Okay, rankings getting real competitive now. Number 10, almost got him. The Joker, the Penguin, Two-Face, Killer Croc, and Poison Ivy sit around the bar late one night, swapping stories about times they almost killed Batman. It's the simplest premise imaginable, and that simplicity is matched by the minimalist style of the bar the characters sit in, built upon barren backgrounds and hanging lamps above the tables. There's so little detail, and yet the space is so vividly realized. Part of that is also the nice little touches, like the fun bits of banter at the table, or the way the villains are first introduced with close-ups on their hands. The cool casualness of the bar is counterpointed by each villain's story of almost killing Batman, a series of fun set pieces which highlight the respective villains' personalities. Two-Face gets to flip a giant coin, Joker takes over late-night TV, Killer Croc throws a rock, Poison Ivy wears this cool black variant on her costume for Halloween that was very important to me as a kid for reasons I will not specify. It's all so great. Having set up all these fantastic characters and the cool style that the show occupies, this episode lets us just hang out in it. The wraparound also brings the episode's core idea full circle in a clever way, and gives what is effectively a pretty loose plot a sense of closure. Number 9, On Leather Wings. The very first episode, and a rather perfect pilot. We are introduced to Batman as combatant, detective, and scientist. We see what separates Batman and Bruce Wayne. Important side characters Gordon, Bullock, and Alfred, and how they relate to Batman are all immediately clear. We even get our first glimpse of Harvey Dent before he becomes Two-Face. Opening in the sky, in a police zeppelin, establishes the otherworldly, quasi-1930s setting and the gothic noir cityscape of Gotham City. It's a story that mixes a sci-fi monster villain and spectacular chase scene with a level of grounding and pronounced danger, conveying the series' tone as dark, but still bound by comic book fantasy. It's exciting, a little scary, and ultimately hopeful. In short, it is an episode that firmly declares, this is Batman the Animated Series, and it is exhilarating. Number 8, I Am the Night. Though it's certainly skewed darker than your Super Friends or other superhero TV of prior generations, Batman the Animated Series was still an adventure show about a hero who triumphed over evil. I Am the Night was an attempt to really probe at despair, picking up with a Batman exhausted by his unending war against crime and doubting if he makes any positive difference. These anxieties accelerate to a full-blown existential crisis when Batman is late for a drug raid and Jim Gordon is shot in the process. This is another significant deviation. The show might have had action and guns, but no one ever actually gets shot. Gordon survives, but he's left in critical condition, and it's unclear if he'll make it. On some level, I just respect the willingness to really go there, to deliver an episode which allows Batman to grieve, to doubt, and to express his longing for Gordon as a friend and father figure. Heavy though the material is, it's ultimately a hopeful story, an affirmation that Batman does make a positive difference in fighting against evil, in saving lives, and inspiring others to be better than they think they can be. That saying about the night being darkest just before the dawn comes to mind here. Number 7, The Man Who Killed Batman. From the darkest Batman episode to the funniest, The Man Who Killed Batman is a comedy story about a nebbish, wannabe criminal whose ineptness accidentally results in the seeming death of Batman, with lowly Sidney transformed into Sid the Squid, the man who offed the bat. Sid himself is wonderfully endearing as this bumbling loser catapulted into the big leagues, and the episode really hits its stride when the Joker arrives. Joker is at first doubtful that this dweeb actually killed the Dark Knight, but as it seems more likely that Batman really is dead, Joker goes through a complex form of grief, at once mourning the loss of his hated enemy and fuming with rage that some dork pulled off what he never could. Watching Sid try and squirm his way out of here is tense and hilarious, with Joker's eulogy proving one of the best scenes in the entire series, the always excellent Mark Hamill really going above and beyond. Joker's just a guest spot on Sid's journey, however, and the way this one-off character's story is finally paid off is quite charming in its own odd way. Number 6, Two-Face. Two-Face is one of the best origins of any Batman villain, a former ally whose physical and mental scars transform him into an enemy, obsessed with duality and the perceived arbitrariness of his own fate. The animated series clearly realized how special what they had was, because Harvey Dent would make several appearances before this two-parter would commit to the transformation, and this is where the writers would make another brilliant change to the source material, making it so Harvey was already struggling with a split personality before his face was scarred. This personality was born from a childhood trauma, leading to Harvey suppressing his anger, allowing it to fester and build as its own entity, a psychological weakness exploited by mobster Rupert Thorne. Part 1 is especially tense and emotionally stirring for that reason, as we watch this character that we like struggle with his demons. And we're not the only one. Harvey in this series isn't strictly an ally to Batman like he is in The Long Halloween or The Dark Knight. He's more specifically a friend of Bruce Wayne, one of the only close friends Bruce has. One of the dramatic tensions of Part 2 is not if Batman can stop Two-Face, but if he can save his friend, a guilt which intermingles with that over his parents' death, in a simple but cutting dream sequence.
Why couldn't you save me?
Why couldn't you save us, son?
And what really stings is Harvey comes so close to returning to the light, only for Thorne to sabotage those efforts. It's one of the most moving and heartbreaking stories in all of Batman. Number 5, Dreams in Darkness. We open in medias res, with Batman locked up in Arkham Asylum, desperately pleading that Dr. Bartholomew take some unspecified, impending danger seriously. Batman's pleas are ignored, however, and his voiceover starts to explain how we got here. A story involving exposure to Scarecrow's fear toxin, creating hallucinations which will plague Batman throughout the episode. From sudden visions of people who aren't there, to full-on nightmares of his enemies and allies teaming up against him, to a hellscape reliving of his parents' murder. A set piece so intense, I'm amazed it made it to broadcast. Spider-Man couldn't even throw a punch on his show, while Batman gets to watch his parents obliterated by a giant gun. I've talked about the horror elements of various episodes throughout this list, but none come close to Dreams in Darkness. I certainly find it effective now, but as a kid, this episode scared the hell out of me, and memories of that fear still linger on rewatches. Nothing else from the series affects me quite like this. Number 4, Robin's Reckoning. Batman showrunners wisely realized that Batman palling around with a little kid wouldn't fit the tone of the series, and aged Robin up to college age. They, of course, would forget that lesson for the new adventures, but I digress. A side effect of this choice, though, is we aren't formally introduced to Robin. He just shows up in Christmas with the Joker, already established. With Robin's Reckoning, we finally get Dick Grayson's origin story, told in flashback after Tony Zuko, the man who killed Robin's parents, reemerges in Gotham City. More than just filling in a gap, this episode effectively probes the relationship between Batman and Robin. Bruce is immediately sympathetic to young Dick when his parents are murdered, and his adoption is a kindness. But he initially treats this kid more as a means to exercise his rage for his own parents' murder.
I was so close, Alfred, I could smell his sweat. From now on, Tony Zuko gets my undivided attention.
It's not until Alfred challenges Batman.
However, at the moment, he needs a friend. Isn't that what you needed, sir?
That Bruce starts to really open up to Dick and become a father figure. A bond which begins with a shared trauma and loss becomes a genuine and loving relationship, and is tested in the main story as Batman tries to keep Robin away from the re-emerged Zuko. Is this Batman again looking to displace his own vengeance, or as Robin suspects, trying to keep Robin away so he won't cross a line and kill Zuko? Neither, it turns out, with Batman confiding his fear that Zuko, having taken so much from Robin, might kill Robin too. And we end on a note of reconciliation. It's a beautiful story that ultimately strengthens the ties between characters. And the cherry on top is the episode spots a number of fantastic stylistic touches, from the musicless shootout to Robin's slick motorcycle driving to the haunting minimalism of the Flying Grayson's death. Excellence from top to bottom. Number 3, Heart of Ice. It's not my number 1, but Heart of Ice is unquestionably the most important episode of Batman the Animated Series. It transformed Mr. Freeze from a jobber to one of the most beloved members of Batman's Rogues Gallery, and it also definitively established the series' goals to tell meaningful, moving stories about compelling characters, while still delivering the excitement of a superhero show. The episode won an Emmy for its writing and has been routinely cited as the best of the series. Removed from the context of its immense legacy, however, Heart of Ice still holds up as an incredible piece of storytelling, effectively generating intrigue around Freeze and his callous character before revealing the full backstory which informs that personality. Michael Ansara finds the perfect tenor between robotic emotionlessness and barely concealed, devastating pain, and deserves a tremendous amount of credit for making Freeze so sympathetic. Kudos as well to Mike Mignola for the excellent character design, and of course Paul Dini for the script. Freeze is able to summarize his grief and loss so succinctly. As the defining episode of the series, Heart of Ice has a lot to be proud of. Number 2, Perchance to Dream. What if Bruce Wayne's parents had never been killed? Perchance to Dream presents Bruce with the life he could have had, the life that on some level he might actually want, a carefree existence as the billionaire heir to Wayne Enterprises, enjoying every material comfort and engaged to Selina Kyle. A world where someone else carries the responsibility of being Batman. Bruce still remembers his parents' murder, still remembers his life as Batman, but everything about this reality suggests that all a delusion. We, of course, know something is wrong, and it's a strength that the episode opens with Batman chasing some goons before a strange apparatus lands on his head. The writers are not trying to trick you. Some sort of brain manipulation is at play. Hell, if you pay attention to the title card, the music is telling you from the start who is behind the fantasy. The focus is not, is this real? And it's not even what's really going on, it's what this fantasy reveals about Bruce Wayne as a character. A last temptation of the Dark Knight. Bruce comes very close to buying in, but ultimately rails against the seductive life weaved around him, culminating with a clock tower confrontation with the villain behind everything, the Mad Hatter. Well, sort of. This isn't actually the Mad Hatter. It's an expression of Bruce's subconscious, deducing that Hatter is the only one with the means and motivations to create this illusion. I love that detail. And I love the scene which ensues, with Kevin Conroy, the greatest of all Batmen, delivering some of the best work in his long tenure playing the character.
That was just the question Tweedledee put to Alice in Through the Looking.
This isn't some silly storybook!
This isn't an ordinary dream. What if you're wrong?
Then I'll see you in your nightmares.
There's an argument that this is the best Batman story the animated series ever told. But it isn't quite my favorite episode. Number 1, The Laughing Fish. Choosing a worst episode might have been easy, but choosing a best episode was brutal. I think I could make a case for any episode in my top 10 as the best. The level of quality is that consistently high. There's also a range of stories across the series' upper echelon that made naming a best difficult. Should I award the deepest character study, or the most stylistically singular, the most emotionally affecting, the one that added the most to the greater Batman mythos? I ultimately decided my number one episode should be the one that encompassed the range of what Batman the Animated Series was and could be, while simultaneously standing on its own. An episode that had great style, wit, and that I've had a deep affection for since childhood. And on that criterion, the only possible answer for best Batman episode is The Laughing Fish. This was one of the episodes I rewatched obsessively on VHS as a kid, and it hasn't lost a step in the decades since. The plot sees the Joker using his laughing toxin on fish to give them that hideous Joker grin. Is this a plot to attack Gotham by poisoning the water or the food supply? Not at all. The toxin only affects fish. Instead, Joker's plan is to copyright these fish and make a fortune. That is, until pencil-pushing copyright clerk G. Carl Francis informs him fish can't be copyrighted because they're a natural resource. So Joker begins harassing Francis until he changes his mind. It's a nonsense goal, as Francis can't change copyright law, and that's why it's great. Joker doesn't really care about copywriting his fish, it's just a funny excuse to hurt someone, and that mixture of comedy and cruelty is evident throughout. Joker has several very funny moments here.
Great Scott! Actually, I'm Irish. Cheer up! You can be my very own little mermaid. I think I'll start using my toxin on cattle. Joker burgers! Talk about a happy meal. Oh, you never could take a joke.
But there's also a level of malice and violence boiling under the surface, including the most frightening Joker gas reaction of all time. That mixture of darkness and silliness runs through the whole of the episode, at once a portrait of Joker bullying the meek in increasingly sadistic ways, and an episode where Batman fights a shark. The episode also spots some great original music, several excellent lines delivered by performers who have mastered their characters, and a great little story. Are there deeper, more emotional episodes of Batman the Animated Series? Absolutely. But no other episode combines so much of what I love about Batman the Animated Series into one beautiful package.
And now, Batman, because I know you're watching, here's a message from our sponsor.
They're finny and funny and oh so delish.
If you made it this far into the video, well, first of all, kudos because it was a lengthy one, but second, I'd like to hear about your favorites. What do you think are the best episodes of Batman the Animated Series? And what are the worst? Are my own takes so crazy that I should be thrown in Arkham? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I will see you later.